Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Planning Commission's meeting, December 8th, 2020. Shannon, could we have roll call?
Messina,
Here.
Fleming,
Here.
Ingalls,
Here.
Lutrip,
Here.
Mandel, Rumpler,
Here.
Ward.
Okay, thank you. If we can do the pledge, please, appreciate it. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
Under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have approval of minutes for November 10th.
I so move.
I will second it.
Have a first and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. This time, any public comments other than what we have on our agenda today? Do we have no one that seems to be here? And Hillary, do you have anyone?
We don't have, we have people on Zoom, but they're staff members and then CDA 2030 and MIG. So we don't have
Okay.
anyone that's
No public
from the
comment.
public
All
at
right.
this time.
Any staff comments besides what we're going to talk about today on the
Just
agenda?
quickly, and good afternoon, Commissioners. So we have just one public hearing item for January. So we'll be bringing that forward to you. And then we're working on scheduling some workshops with City Council on this Envision Coeur d'Alene, just to kind of give them the same information you're getting and then your recommendations as well. So kind of keep them on track and get everybody having the same information.
Okay.
That's all we have. Thanks.
All right, great. Thank you. Any commissioner comments? No? None we had? Okay. We'll move on to our public hearings. They're more of action items. The first one is the applicant is the City of Coeur d'Alene, proposed housekeeping amendments to Title 16 and Title 17 of the Municipal Code. And Hillary's up there already.
All right, well, so a little bit of background on this. So as you know, the planning department administers our zoning code and subdivision code, and so routinely we look at the codes and we realize there's some inconsistencies. So we did come to you about a year and a half ago when we had some housekeeping. Well, we missed a few things related to notice of decisions and that should be tied to the date of mailing versus date of publication, things like that, as well as some carryovers from when there was a mail planning director, so things that needed to be cleaned up like that. There's also some other items in there, inconsistencies with the commercial design guidelines related to buffer yards, so landscape standards, things like that. So here before you today with some of those cleanup items in the subdivision code, zoning code, and then the commercial design guidelines. So the public hearing is really only on the Title 16 and 17, so subdivision code, zoning code, but since it's tied to some of the changes that need to be made in the commercial design guidelines, I'm just presenting it all at one time. And then the code amendments will need to go on to City Council for final approval. And then if they approve those, if you approve the changes to the design guidelines, and that'll happen subsequently. So kind of a little background on that for you. And so therefore, you'll also have to make two separate motions and decisions on those items. So jump right in. So Title 16, there are really just a couple changes related to the appeal timing. As I mentioned, that should be tied to when the notice of decision is mailed to the applicant rather than the date of publication. So we had made some changes, as I mentioned, and we wanted to have the zoning code and subdivision code consistent on that. So that was really the changes there. The Title 17, so our zoning ordinance, so a few things we changed in here. So we did clarify the language regarding an aggrieved or an affected party, so who has standing to appeal a decision. And so what we did, we worked with Randy and legal department on looking at state statutes. And so as you can see in the staff, excuse me, in the staff report, that we've actually changed the language to mirror that of the state statutes so that it's a little bit more clear when someone would have the ability to appeal a decision. And so really it's tied to someone that has a bona fide interest in real property that might be adversely affected. And so that's how the language now reads. We clarified as well in here the R34 zoning district. And so our zoning code, as we've had some community members say before, it's really unclear. Is R34 just something you get with a special use permit, or is it a zoning district? And then does it also allow not only the the 34 units per acre, so the increase in density, but does it allow the increase in height? And then there were a few things, it was unclear, what is Coeur d'Alene's transportation master plan? Is that our own, or is that something else? And so clarifying that, as well as we talked about school and park proximity, that wouldn't really be relevant for, if it's something where it's just adult only, well, in looking at that with city engineer, it made sense to keep parks as a relevant thing for an R34 decision. So we have clarified that it is just a special use permit. It's not a zoning district on its own. It used to be in the past before we had the downtown core zoning. It does allow the increased height. So that's something that staff has said all along, and that was the intent of the code, was you get 34 units per acre, you get up to 63 feet in height, that's automatic with it. The transportation plan that's referenced should be KMPO's 2020 transportation plan. There's chapters in there that are for Coeur d'Alene, and that's the plan we use currently. And then, as I mentioned, the park proximity is still a factor. The next item is related to building a single-family residence within the MH8 zoning district. So there's already the ability to do that, but it was unclear on how tall that could be. And so just clarifying that in the code, that would be basically the same as any other zoning district if you're building that type of housing. For the C17, for commercial zoning, really clarifying site performance standards. Looked at that because we have the ability to be zero setback on the side and the rear for commercial, but the problem is if there's eaves that hang over, or if there's stormwater or other impacts on neighboring properties, that's in violation of our code. So clarifying that that can't happen, and that there might be instances when we need to have a further setback based on the design of the building and if building code, things like that. So that's one of the things, as well as allowing for a horizontal mixed-use project to use the setbacks of that use, basically. So it's allowing a little bit more flexibility with projects. So I mentioned we had some carryover. We still had some, he made this decision, all of those things. So we clarified that. We added proper titles for planning director, city engineer, city attorney, and then added or designee in places. We also wanted to clarify for accessory dwelling units, so ADUs, that the height can be 24 feet, but it's if over a garage. So if it's a standalone, it's still 18 feet in the rear yard. So that, we just wanted to make sure that was crystal clear. As I mentioned, there was an inconsistency on that buffer yard. So in the zoning code, commercial design guidelines, they were actually opposite. So one said if it's next to residential zoning, and the other one said next to residential use. So now we're proposing to change them so they both say zoning or use, because it's, that makes a lot of sense in both cases, that you'd have to have some kind of landscape buffer between those uses. And then lastly, it clarified that appeal process as well. Commercial design guidelines, very simple fix, just on the one page under site design, again, related to if it's adjacent to a residential district or use. So with that, your decision points are, first one, to recommend approval of housekeeping amendments to both Titles 16 and 17 of the Municipal Code to the City Council, and to approve amendments to the commercial design guidelines, subject to approval of the housekeeping amendments by City Council. And because the first ones are related to the public hearing, you'll have to hear from the public on that, and then make your two motions.
Okay.
With that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Quick question.
Sure.
So our packet here is also on the web.
Yes.
So, and what you have here is housekeeping, or summarized them, but also in our packet, it shows, it underlines the specific changes you had
Correct.
and any striking. So
Yes.
people can read that if they want. Every once in a while you hear rumbles with, nobody knows. Well, it takes some effort sometimes, but it is there. So if people have concerns about what is housekeeping, what are they can go right to the websites, they can say specifically what we're addressing.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. So that is absolutely correct. So in the packet, and which is online, it does show strike-through underlines for those changes that we've made.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Hillary?
Can you hear me here?
Yes?
John here.
We have one person.
Oh, this is John Ingalls.
John,
This is Commissioner
yes.
Ingalls.
I'm sorry?
Commissioner Ingalls,
Yeah.
he's talking. He has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, John.
Raise the volume a little
Oh,
bit.
that's all right.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
A little bit higher
I-
volume.
I have a hard time hearing.
Yeah, a little quiet.
Well, I'll do the best I can. This is what I have to work with. Can you hear me?
That's better.
That's better.
All right.
Okay. So I just wanted to emphasize, because, I think the newspapers and whatnot, they see maybe a headline that, the city is changing its subdivision code or making amendments to the subdivision code or whatnot, and that might get people's attention. But, as I read through this thing a time or two, I'd like to emphasize, correct me if I'm wrong, that these are all really clarifications in nature and housekeeping and whatnot. I didn't see anything in this that makes any real substantive change to, what you can and can't do. It's really just clarification. So as you interact with developers and whatnot, things are, your words, more crystal clear, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Any other comments? No? Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Howard. I have David Lyons. Come on up, David.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and I'll just kind of swear you in. And give me just your name.
David
You
Lyons.
swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Well, go right ahead, David.
I'm here to oppose the R34 changes because they expand the existing high-density loophole into a high-density and height loophole. You remember missing middle housing, the presentation by Tony Perez of Opticos. He was brought here by the planning department, who embraced his ideas. Mr. Perez's basic idea for densification was house-scale buildings with multiple units inside. Duplexes, triplexes, courtyard bungalows in or on the edge of residential neighborhoods. Structures that look like a large house and so fit in with the residential character of the neighborhood. Don't destroy it. In fact, Mr. Perez had a slide. It was a picture of an apartment building in a red circle with a line through it. Large apartment buildings, bad. These are 34 changes, and they are substantive changes. Go opposite to all that. They enable large apartment buildings next to neighborhoods that can destroy the neighborhood ambience and character. And if Mr. Perez were here, I think he'd say, close the loophole, don't expand it. R34 is one of 17 standalone zoning districts laid out in Chapter 17.05, in Title 17, each with its own specific attributes and so on. But R34 has a quirk, and R34 alone has the quirk. You can get a density increase to 34 per acre by a special use permit alone. Only density. As the law now stands, if you want a height increase, if you want any of the other attributes, lot size, yard size, et cetera, you have to apply for a zone change. The city's current map of R34 areas shows there's never been an actual R34 zone area. All there's ever been is a helter-skelter collection of about 35 properties citywide where over the years somebody applied for and got a 34 density special use permit. There's never been a plan, and there should be a plan, where to put this high density. And the code calls it high density, 17.05.330. The R34 district is intended as a high-density residential district, permitting 34 units per gross acre. There's never been a plan where to put this, such as in major corridors or commercial areas. Currently, and over the years, it's just been applied spot by spot citywide, which lets a developer put up a massive, by Coeur d'Alene standards, multi-story apartment building in or on the edge of an established residential neighborhood that can destroy the neighborhood. So my question is, why is R34 treated so differently from all the other zones? If someone wants R34 height and density, they can apply for a zone change, like any other zone. I asked you to develop a plan where to put this high density and eliminate this spot-by-spot loophole. Don't expand it. Now, if I have a minute, I'd like to also address the administrative appeal issue, the definition of aggrieved or person aggrieved, which is basically who can file an appeal to the city council. As I read these materials, the rationale for the changes, the previous definition was very broad. Anybody who's I think a resident of Coeur d'Alene, anyone who owns property in Coeur d'Alene, et cetera, et cetera. And now it's changed and restricted to, you have to have a bona fide interest in property that may be adversely affected by whatever your decision was, or the planning department, et cetera, et cetera. And the rationale, as I read this, was to line it up with the state statute on standing, on person aggrieved, et cetera. Thought about that for a couple of seconds, and it really makes no sense, because those are two completely separate situations with separate considerations. The state statute, I'll be done in.
No, it's fine.
The state statute definition of person aggrieved determines who can file a lawsuit in Kootenai County District Court against the city after exhausting all of the administrative process. And that situation is very different and has different considerations from who should participate in front of the Planning Commission and the City Council. The state statute, who can file a lawsuit, courts have considerations unique to them. And one thing they require is something called a case or controversy. They don't just give advisory opinions on interesting issues of the day that appeal to them. They require a concrete case or controversy in front of them with two or more sides, each of whom has a tangible interest, and will advocate strenuously, therefore, and illuminate the issues. That's why the aggrieved person definition there requires you have to own an interest in property that may be adversely affected. You're a neighbor or within X hundred feet or something. Planning Commission and City Council, very different. These are organs of government of the people of Coeur d'Alene. There are many things that the Planning Commission decides on which are of interest citywide. Take, for example, say McEwen Park. I know that was an urban renewal project, but something, McEwen Park or the Parkside or McEwen Terrace, big projects. People citywide might think, well, I don't want Coeur d'Alene to lose its small town feel, and so I'm opposed to that, and come in and talk to you guys and oppose, even though they live a couple of miles away. But they're addressing their local government on matters of public interest, citywide public interest. So this standing issues there are completely different from courts, from the state statute. Courts limiting things in front of them. They don't want their dockets all clogged up with interesting, advisory. It has to be a case or controversy. That's why they have that requirement. No need for anything like that. In the public, speaking to you guys and then speaking to the city council and being able to appeal it up to the city council. So if, say, some big project is proposed and a group of people come in and they're opposed to all this continued growth of Coeur d'Alene, and we want the old town feel of Coeur d'Alene, and da-da-da-da, and they lose, and you know, as the law exists today, they could then appeal that to the city council, who are their elected representatives. And if 10 of them appear in front of the city council and argue against it, the city council members, I dare say, are well aware that those are voters out there, and they have friends who are voters. So I think the change in the standing aggrieved person requirement, while the argument has some superficial plausibility to sort of line it up with the state statute, they're two completely different situations with completely different considerations. So I oppose that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
I have a couple questions.
Yes, sir.
When you talk about this R34.
Yes.
Density and heights, what is the height change we're doing?
Okay, the way the law is now, and I've got the R34 here, you can get by special use permit a density increase, but that's the only R34 attribute you can get by special use permit. There's others, there's height, there's lots, you know, minimum lot size, blah, 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 blah. So if you applied for and got an actual R34 zone change, you could have up to 63 feet for multifamily, which is 5 stories plus, I guess you'd say. But if all you get is the density increase, in terms of height, you still are bound by the height of your existing district. There's no zone change. So if you're C17 or C17L, et cetera, your height for multifamily stays the same. And that's for R17, C17, C17L, 45 feet. So which is 4 stories, effectively. So that's the difference we're talking about here.
So we're changing that in this?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. You're changing it.
No, we're not.
So I
we're not.
respectfully, with respect to Hillary, I disagree that it's clarification. I believe it's a substantive change,
So we're changing from what to what?
45 to 63. There was a project that Parkwood Properties applied for over in Riverstone. And I wrote to you guys and as well to Hillary and protested it and said, look, the old zoning didn't really change. So this 63-foot, 5-story height is illegal. If he wants to apply for a zone change, he can apply for a zone change to R34 and get that. But that's being more straightforward. I don't understand why there are all these gimmicks with R34. Why, and it alone, by the way, to be able to get all these goodies with a special use permit alone and without having to ask for a zone change. It's unique in that respect. And I just don't understand why the loophole exists in the first place.
Can I speak
I don't
just
know
real
if we're a
quick?
loophole.
Can I speak just
Go
real quick?
ahead, go.
No, just
Well,
let-
R34, because it's a special use, I first of all don't think the city of Coeur d'Alene would accept an R34 district. I think we'd have a huge avalanche of opposition, because you're right away saying, yeah, now we're downtown Seattle. So I think we, as a group, look at each R34 as a very specific implant into the existing fabric of the city. And so we do look at what's adjacent and the impact it will have on those individual properties, whether they're a 4-story or whether they're multifamily. I think what it does is, because it is an exception and it is under special use, we drill down a little harder than if you blanket an entire area and say, yeah, sure, R34, everywhere you want it. I know this city, the people on the street will say, hell no. We already have enough opposition just going high in our downtown heavily used corridor. So I think that in thought, this is really more like a stopper that says it's got to be pretty compelling for us to push the 34.
Well,
So that's what I think, why I think this is the right way to go, as opposed to blanketing a zone or defining areas, and everybody adjacent to that goes, what do you mean? I can have R-34s all along my back lane now? You know, and they don't want that. They definitely don't want that in this small town feel.
Well, if I could respond
Sure.
briefly.
Yeah, it's your podium.
It makes sense to me to have an R-34 zone district like all the other zoning, all the other R3, R5, you know, C17, C17L, et cetera. You look on the GIS map, different color codes, et cetera. Put them in commercial areas. Put them on, restricted to major corridors, you know, something like that. But as it exists now, there is a downtown core plan, and I realize the downtown core height is higher than this, fine. But, so it's sort of a small version of downtown core. But I think there should be some plan where to put it. Respectfully, if I may say, in terms of restraining this on a case-by-case basis, which is the idea. I and other members of a group opposed a project that was going to be on Mill and Davidson, by the mayor, in fact, and his partner, Mr. Reagan. That was zoned, one of the lots was R17, one was C17L. Everything else around there is R12. And it would just tower over the neighborhood. And that's a neighborhood where, and there are a lot of what I would call marginal neighborhoods that could go either way. If with some support, they could prosper. You know, people would move in, buy, fix up young families, you know, fixer-upper, starter house, that kind of stuff, and the neighborhood could prosper. But put a big apartment building on the edge of it, and that, you know, you just get tipped over the edge. So there was no stopper there, with all due respect, on that Mill Davidson project. It was appealed to the city council, and 20-something neighbors finally got in gear at the 11th hour and showed up at the city council and protested. But by then, it's too late. You know, I like to think of it as the well-organized neighborhoods, you know, the Garden District, the Fort Grounds, Sanders Beach. We don't have to worry. They'll take care of themselves. You know, we don't have to worry about them. When you heard from the Garden District with the old Social Security building project over on 7th Street. It's the more marginal neighborhoods that could go either way. And the fear is that with all this increasing densification and five-story apartment buildings spotted anywhere, literally in the city. I mean, the hospital, I think, is only 3 stories, unless I miss my guess. That Old Coeur d'Alene is vulnerable. And these older neighborhoods that could go either way, you know, are vulnerable. They could prosper with support, but they're vulnerable to, and I think Mr. Perez's solution of, you know, house-scale buildings with multiple units inside, that put multiple units instead of just one on that lot, is a much better solution. And personally, I think if he were here, I'll never forget that slide he had with apartment building, red circle, line through it. So, anyway, that's my case.
Thank you, appreciate it. Hillary, do you want to?
Back up to
Sure,
the
I
podium.
wanna-
Back up
Yeah,
there.
I think
And
you can-
also to clarify, Commissioner Ward is on Zoom. So we
Oh.
promoted him to panelist, so I
Howdy.
apologize, Commissioner Ward.
Okay.
You are now with us on Zoom. All right, well, let me clarify a few of the items that Mr. Lyons raised. So regarding the aggrieved or affected parties, so while I can see what Mr. Lyons was saying, why he feels that it's a little bit different for a planning commissioner, city council, there really is a lot of merit in having this mirror the state statutes, because if you want to raise a lawsuit, you have to go through the appeals process with the city, right? To be able to take it to the next level, to go to the courts. And so you really need to be able to follow that same process through the city. And not only that, what if you said, I don't like that guy. I'm going to appeal every project he ever gets approved just because I can, because I live in the city. You know, so really to be able to have the standing be tied to something, so you have a bona fide interest, it directly affects you. The decision affects you versus, I don't like that guy. I'm going to appeal everything that they're going to do. I think that's where it's really important for us to take a look at this. And we also have this very similar language in other sections of our municipal code that really is tied more to the bona fide interest in property. And Randy may want to speak more to that as well, since he was the one that thought, you know, this really makes a lot of sense to tie it to the state statutes language. Regarding R34, I want to respectfully disagree with Mr. Lyons, because staff, every time he said that we're doing it the wrong way, we've said, no, this is how it's drafted. Now, it's not entirely clear in the code, and that's why we're changing some of the language to make it clear, but it specifically says, and we didn't change this, the city has the option of granting through the special use permit procedure, the R34. It's not a zoning district, it's through that. And the height has always been tied to that. You get the 63, up to 63 feet. So any of the projects that have been approved recently with R34 are granted 34 units per acre and 63 feet in height. So the one in Riverstone is not illegal, it's allowed to be 63 feet in height, so. But to his point, it's true that maybe not every location is appropriate for R34, and that's why we're working on core housing, to give other opportunities, to allow for the house scale, to make sure we're not negatively impacting neighborhoods, and also why we're working on Envision Coeur d'Alene, and having a future land use map that will help with decision-making to determine where should special use permits be granted, where are certain zone changes appropriate. So I think the discussion today and our next item on the workshop will be great at kind of really talking about place types and future land use map and looking at how we make decisions for growth of the community. So with that, I will stop unless you have further questions for me, and then if Randy has anything else on that aggrieved or affected party.
Question on the appeals.
Yes.
This change, is this going to restrict the applicants? Is it going to make it
It will
harder for a person?
restrict, it'll restrict who can appeal a decision. It'll tie it to someone that has an interest, a bona fide interest in real property.
There's a nexus of some sort, I guess.
Correct, right, which is how it is in communities across the country, where it's, you really need to have a
So
direct
if-
impact. So it's
If I live
negative,
in part of town A, North Town,
right,
and I don't like something that's going on in South Town, and I want to tell everybody that I don't like it and they should vote against it,
right,
possibly couldn't appeal it.
correct. This would change that. So you'd
But-
have to have so either you own property or you have something that's tied to that versus, yes, you just,
Currently, I
disagree.
could appeal it.
Currently, you could appeal it. So currently, it says, any resident of the city of Coeur d'Alene or any person having interest in real property in the city of Coeur d'Alene or any person with an interest in real property located within 300 feet of the external boundaries of the land being considered could appeal it.
Or within 300 feet.
Right. So
But that
now we're
doesn't eliminate-
clarifying, tightening it, because, so yeah, if you're 300 feet, you have a
Yeah,
bona fide interest,
You have a
right?
bona fide interest, so it's
Right.
not eliminating.
But if you're just a
two-thirds of
person who
this.
happens to live in Coeur d'Alene and you just hate what's happening, you're going to appeal every single decision that happens. The code kind of allows for that now, so we're trying to tighten it up.
So is that wrong?
No.
I mean, let
Staff
people
feels-
bitch. I mean, let them complain, and it seems to me it's sort of a complaint process.
Well,
And then
the-
you take it before the planning zone, you take it before the city. And do we have a lot of those where the people do not have the nexus to the?
We have some, we do,
How
and
much is it enough to be a headache?
I think it could be considered that. I think it should really be tied to something, as I mentioned. I mean, you want to be able to have it so it's setting up this appeal process to be able to take it to court if you want to, right? So versus us just getting every person that disagrees doing the appeal process, for planning and zoning matters, it should be directly tied to if there's a bona fide interest. Now, the other thing, though, is we work on our comprehensive plan and other things like that. That's where we want public to give us the input early on, right? So you have the big picture and the vision of how do you make your decisions. And so that's, if someone disagrees with R34 being everywhere, well, then let's kind of work through that on future land use map and policy language so that when you make your decisions, you can say, okay, well, I'm making these decisions, these policies in the future land use map have input from the community, so I feel confident in making that decision so we don't get frivolous appeals all the time.
my experience has been that sometimes when you don't let a person talk, that causes more problems than letting them talk. Sometimes when they talk, appeal, they may not make any sense. A lot of things happen. But if you don't let a person talk, then all of a sudden that becomes the issue. Not only am I against this, but they don't let me talk. And so unless there's a lot in the appeal process, now speaking to the R34, I sort of like how it sets up, I really do. And if there needs to be any change in that, I would suggest it goes through our comprehensive plan, But anyway, thank you.
Randy, you want to see?
I just wanted to clarify that the amendment to the who can appeal has nothing to do with who can speak
Heard,
at a
right.
public hearing
Correct.
on an issue.
Correct.
Anybody can still, wherever they live, may still come in and address council
Correct.
or the planning commission on any particular issue. The only issue that's being changed is who would have the right to appeal to the next level, because it affects them.
John, David, I'm sorry, but right now we're in the process, we're in the rebuttal stage, as we call, so we're giving the applicant a chance, and then after that, we'll have discussion for what we're going to talk about in a decision.
Well, all I
Go
know,
ahead.
it always interests me when somebody comes in, if we had testimony, it was testimony from his sister who lived in Post Falls. That's a wonderful sister, a wonderful place to live, but it didn't make any sense for that to appeal. I think if a person can talk, I think it's very important that people can talk. And you all are the city attorney's office, the one that has to fight the battles. And if they understand the importance of people talking, being able to give their view, and under what circumstances, and if they still can give that view, then I'm happy with the change.
And I think what Randy said is exactly right. We're not taking away the ability for anyone to testify at a public hearing before a planning commission or city council. It's just who can take that next step to say, I oppose that approval. I'm going
Pays
to appeal
$100
the
to-
decision, and which means there's multiple hearings through that process and sets it up for potential litigation. So.
Any other comments in any of our commissioners that aren't here, that are in Zoom land?
This is Louis Rumpler.
Go ahead.
I would just like to say that both in terms of the clarifying amendments and the change to the need for an interest or an excess to appeal or to litigate, I'm in support of both those changes, or all those changes.
Thanks, Lou. Thank you, Lou. Appreciate it. John, you have anything to say?
I concur with Lewis's comments. I agree with Commissioner Fleming's assessment of the R34. I think making it clear that the R34 district is available through the special use permit, and then all of the attributes that would come with R34, including height, are allowed through that special use permit. They're given a public hearing, a lot of eyes, a lot of testimony, a lot of input, and reasonable decisions are made.
Thank you, John.
And I'd like to chime in as well with everything that's been said by both Commissioner Ingalls and with Commissioner Rumpler. I'm in full agreement with the direction of the conversation, where it's been going. So just want to let you know all that.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Okay. Any other comments here, present?
Do we need to open up the public?
No, we're done with
Good.
public.
Okay.
In the rebuttal. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Well, just to say, so if you're done with that, then close the public hearing, and then the two motions would be
Right, yeah.
on the table.
Looking for a motion on both the items. And it's just not a roll call, it's just a,
Simple motion, Chairman. I would motion that we recommend to the City Council the approval of the Title 16 amendments as presented.
Ms.
right, and
Chairman?
also the commercial.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
So
it'll
both
be the,
Titles 16 and 17.
right.
I
Should
thought we
be
had to do them one at a time.
separate
No,
motions?
both are fine, yes.
Well,
Yeah,
no.
we can do both at the same
To
time.
clarify. So, two motions.
Two
But the
motions.
first one's not just Title 16, it's Title 16 and 17.
Okay.
Housekeeping. And then the second motion is the commercial design guidelines.
Did you get that, John?
What she said.
Second,
Recommend
You gotta
approval
be
of
here
the
from now on.
housekeeping amendments to Title 16 subdivision ordinance and Title 17 zoning ordinance of the municipal code to the city council. I'll second that motion.
All right, we have a motion. All in favor?
All right,
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, now we have another motion.
I'll
Please.
move that we approve the amendments of the commercial design guidelines subject to approval of the housekeeping amendments by the city council.
Thank you. I have a motion.
I'll second that.
We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None being, motion passed. Okay, so at this time, we're going to close the public hearing portion of our meeting and go into our workshop for Vision Coeur d'Alene. And Sean, are you taking that one over?
Sure. I'll do the lead in. First,
Okay.
I'd like to say hopefully everybody had a happy Thanksgiving. We're kind of in between the Thanksgiving and Christmas time, so it's a little difficult to get everybody together. And I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for showing up. I know it's not always the easiest time of the year to do that. You can remember, or Planning Commission can remember, I sent out an email to everybody that had some background information on what we're going to cover today, which is the land use scenarios as well as place types. And it's the next logical step following our policy document discussion and review, which you guys had just gone through and approved. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Alex Dupy. He is with MIG, and he has a PowerPoint that he will run through and explain what we have all been working on. Alex, are you there?
I am, thank you. All right, can everybody see the shared screen?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Yep.
All right, well, once again, thank you for having me in today. My name's Alex Dupy. I'm the Director of Planning Services for MIG, and today we're going to step through, as Sean mentioned, the scenarios. Some of these pieces you've seen, we're going to dive into them a little bit more deeply, but also get into place types and show you some examples of other comprehensive plan land use maps and how that translates into zoning. I know there's been some questions about, kind of what this ultimately looks like within the Envision Coeur d'Alene document. So we want to be able to provide some input on that, as well as take the next step and to start developing that draft land use map for your review. Let's see here. There we go. All right. So with this, a couple of kind of key pieces that we're gonna cover. First, it'll be the alternatives that we've looked at in terms of scenarios and development. We did, as you know, a pretty large public engagement outreach effort through the summer. We're going to share some of the results for that, which I think is germane to helping kind of move forward a selection for what type of land use we might want to consider. And then we also have some new information for you today. We're going to show you some preliminary traffic analysis results based on each of these scenarios. And then we'll talk specifically about what a land use map looks like in a comprehensive plan, and then those place types, or in other terms, those generalized land use classifications. Just as a reminder of where we're at, we're getting towards the end of the process. So with the last meeting, we developed the policy framework, which is also a very important piece of the land use equation for this. We are developing the draft comprehensive plan right now. This is another key component of that. And ultimately, in early 2021, coming back to you with a draft plan. And so this is an important step in helping us kind of get those pieces together. So there's a few questions I'd like you to consider as we step through this presentation. We'll come back to these, so don't feel like you have to memorize these questions as we go through. But a couple kind of key points I think that are going to be germane to this conversation today. From a comprehensive plan standpoint, what land use guidance do you think is needed in the plan? And this goes back specifically to a lot of the public engagement results that really focused on being able to increase the ability to walk, bicycle, take transit safely, and have those access to nearby services, which within the policy framework we know is a key component of those specific objectives and actions. But then also, and this gets to a question actually in the previous, the hearing portion of this meeting, how do we provide diverse housing options throughout the city? Whether that's core housing or other types, single family housing, how do we provide housing for not just today, but for the next 20 years or so within Coeur d'Alene to meet existing and emerging needs. And then also, as we step through the scenarios, is there one that really starts to articulate a vision? Know that we do need to get to a draft land use map. Are there scenarios, or is there a scenario or a combination of scenarios that really starts to get at those earlier land use policy questions that we just mentioned? And then finally, starting to tie this together with core housing, which again was just discussed earlier. Are there specific things we should consider on a land use map that really start to articulate that core housing vision, which I know many of you have been working on a lot over this past several months. So before I jump in, I want to talk just kind of briefly about what a scenario map is, scenario planning is versus a comprehensive land use map. From a scenario planning is really just a way to test different assumptions of how growth might occur over time. It's not a land use map. It's a way for us to say, what if we added more mixed use? What if we decided to be more commercially focused? What if we added more single family? What are the types of trade-offs that we start to see within each of those scenarios? So when you look at these scenarios that we're going to be describing in more detail, it's not a land use map per se, but some of those pieces do inform what a comprehensive land use map might look like in the future. So don't think you have to select one and move forward with it. It's really like, is it starting to tell us what we want to know? And how does that work for future actions within a comprehensive plan? A comprehensive plan map does show those generalized land use categories. We're calling those place types within this process, but many communities call them general land use descriptions, classifications. Place types is another name for it. But it's really about implementing the vision and growth related policies. The comprehensive land use map is really about future growth. When you think about zoning versus comprehensive planning, zoning is what can happen today. You have a set of prescribed standards that can happen on the ground today. The comprehensive plan map is really about that vision, about that future. And that's something that Hillary was talking about previously, about how do we address growth over time. And that's really where a future land use map can start to come into play and be beneficial for making decisions. So for some of these, and if we put together a quick video, and you've seen some of these images before, but we've pulled out some of those slides from the video that describe the scenarios and place types. So if you watch that video, some of these will look very familiar. I just thought it'd be important to step through it so we're all on the same page on what we're talking about. So let's start with the building blocks. First, place types are essentially those generalized land use categories that you would see on a typical comprehensive plan map. We've used these since the beginning of the project. Actually, we had looked at your existing zoning and actually developed preliminary place types to play the Build a Better Coeur d'Alene game back early on in the project back in September. We've continued to use these and refine them as we've got more information from the community, but also as a way to start to kind of establish that framework as a part of the project itself. And so when we think about place types, and we'll step through some more specifics, the place type is really that generalized land use category that talks broadly about how growth could occur in a specific area that it's applied. It implements the vision and guiding principles, and then it's implemented through specific development code. So one place type could be implemented through multiple codes. We'll show some examples in a moment. So when we step through place types, when you look at the graph, and Sean, I believe, sent these out to you earlier, so you have them, there's a number of kind of key elements that helps establish what a place type is. The first is that we have precedent images of what this might look like. It doesn't mean that there's specific design requirements within a place type, but it generally shows scale. We talk about density and open space, those key characteristics of what that area should look like. In this case, this is compact neighborhood. So it's more walkable, a variety of housing types, both detached and attached types of housing. It also talks about kind of the transportation network that's there to support that. So those are things that this place type, in this case compact neighborhood, starts to show what should be in the future. When we look at this, so as I was saying, this is general guidance on scale and open space, for example. And then I think this is an important component, is that there is also that connection to your existing zoning. So within a compact neighborhood place type, for example, there's a number of different types of residential and neighborhood commercial zones that could be applied within that specific place type. And we'll show some examples from Post Falls and Boise to give you a better picture of what that might look like. So for this, we have about 9 place types that have been developed as a part of this that accommodate pretty much all of the zones within the existing Coeur d'Alene development code. You'll see that there is some overlap between some of these place types. For example, single family and compact neighborhood both allow R8 zoning. C17 is allowed both in urban neighborhood as well as mixed use. So it's not like one piece only covers a specific set. There is definitely flexibility in how these are applied. And then also the 2 in boxes, 4A, which is a mixed use activity center, and then 8, which is a neighborhood center. We had heard both from Planning Commission, City Council, as well as focus groups that there might be specific areas where you want a specific type of growth or a specific type of development. And so these could be applied as hubs or as identifiers on the map that shows we really want something just a little bit different on this intersection, for example, or other places. And I'll show you how the city of Boise does that in just a moment. So we use those place types as the base. And again, those have been evolving over time. And we developed some scenarios. And so if you've watched the video, you've seen these maps. There's a lot of input that goes into those scenarios that I'm not going to step through today. But just to give you a sense of, we looked at existing zoning, we looked at existing development patterns to get a sense of what's happening now. We also looked at scale of development, where there's higher density, for example, of existing number of dwelling units as well as employment areas. So we looked at that as well too as inputs prior to developing the scenario. We also looked at vacant lands. The map on the left, which is showing the gray pieces, that's your vacant lands map. And it's pretty clear if you look within city limits, there is not a lot of vacant land available. But if you start to look at land that is potentially underdeveloped, that picture starts to get a little bit different. So if you look on the map on the right, there is potential for some redevelopment within the area. Even if there's existing development on it now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to be that way in the future. So we take these things into account when we think about scenarios. So with that, with those inputs, with what the community has told us they were looking at in terms of development patterns, growth, the goals and visions for more walkable spaces, access to services near neighborhoods, we focused on developing three specific scenarios that start to address those pieces. The first is corridor. And corridor, I'd say, is probably the most kind of similar to what your existing development pattern is. We looked at those vacant redevelopable parcels and started to apply, some commercial, some mixed use, really trying to provide some of that scale. But, it's really looking at more of the existing development, redevelopment potential under your current scenario. I think you'll see that bear out in some of the results. We developed compact, and compact is the most, of the scenarios, the most intense. This is really looking at kind of that central space, within Coeur d'Alene that really starts to kind of grab, both residential and employment. There's more scale to it. It's focused on the corridors. If there's opportunity for redevelopment, it's going to be in mixed use, multifamily, other types of housing that could apply to core housing as well, too. So this one really looks at that core development with some nodes on the outside, but really that core area right in the middle. And then finally, district is a combination of both corridor and compact. And so we looked at that existing development pattern, but we started to think about, a lot of the redevelopment sites are existing commercial areas. Are there ways that you could modify that to provide more mixed use, more multifamily, more services that really start to kind of reallocate some of that older commercial space to become a little bit more dynamic, and then still supports, the goals and the policies that the community identified as creating more of a walkable neighborhood. Excuse me. All right. So those are the three scenarios. And I think with this one in particular, there's a lot of color on the maps, but I think the ones to focus for this is, starting to see, areas. Let's see if I can do this here. Kind of areas to the north, the central portions, and over here to show more some of the dynamic spaces. All right, turn this off. All right. So as outputs for this, and we've shown these before, but I think it's important to bring them back up. We looked at both areas within just the city limits. Are there, what would some of these scenarios start to look like within city limits, but as well as within the area of city impact? And kind of a precedent that we're looking for is KMPO's current 2040 population assumption is about 85,000 people. That's what they use typically for their traffic modeling. And so I'd say when you look at these scenarios, I wouldn't look so much at the final number. What I would look at is the comparison between the two, the differences that we're showing. So what you're really going to see from either a population or a housing standpoint is the type of land uses within each of those scenarios and what they would provide. This has an impact on the efficiencies within the transportation system as well, too, that Kittleson has been evaluating. So with this, if we look at the city results, with the base scenario, which is essentially existing zoning, there's about accommodation for about 58,000 people, 59,000 people, which is consistent with what we saw from the vacant lands map. You're pretty close to that already. There isn't a lot of vacant land available still. But if we look at other development scenarios, whether it's corridor, which is essentially kind of a little bit different than what the existing is, but provides a little bit more housing or mixed use, it starts to bump that up, but still is not getting kind of much increase in terms of what would be permitted within these areas. And then district and compact are degrees of difference, primarily because we're allowing a little bit more scale within either centralized areas or district level, but it's really more about mixed use and different types of housing. When we push it further out to the ACI, our scenario shows that it's about 81,000. That's not that far off from KMPOs. I think it's more methodologies that show there. The areas outside of the ACI, with some exceptions, are going to be primarily single family for the most part. There's a lot of either environmental limitations, steep slopes, they're within forested areas. So you do get some scale moving out to the ACI, but in terms of what is existing and what is allowed, really the opportunities are on those redevelopment sites within the city limits, with some exceptions within the ACI.
Alex?
Yes.
Would you mind if I jump in on that slide if you go back? Thank you. So just wanted to point out for the commission on this slide as well. So this is looking at city limits plus area of city impact. But one of the things we've been talking about as a project management team is while these numbers all look kind of dramatically different, we don't anticipate that any of them would have very different growth kind of percentage year over year than we currently have. So this is more kind of like maximum development potential, not necessarily by the year 2040. We don't expect that, one of these is going to get us that we're really going to get 123,000 people by the year 2040. It's more just there could be that ability over time with those development patterns. So I think that's really important. Don't freak out and say, oh my gosh, I can't consider any of these other ones other than corridor because it's way over. It's more just looking at land use patterns, and Alex will work through more of that. But I just wanted to point that out on this slide.
Yeah, Hillary, thanks for pointing that out. I mean, when we look at the scenarios, this is if every single parcel developed to its maximum, and we know that that just doesn't happen. And so really what this is looking at is what if you started to change some of the land uses? Are there opportunities for some different components that might go in there? But I think Hillary is absolutely right. Just because you allow some of these other uses doesn't mean that you're going to get, significantly different population numbers. It's really more about kind of the rate of growth, which we don't expect to have major changes than what you've seen in the past. So I'm just going to step through some of these others because I know we do have a cut off at 1:30. In terms of housing, housing from either within the city or within the ACI, the base scenario is primarily single family, and that is consistent with compact and district. Although particularly with compact, we are assuming more multifamily, which could be horizontal or vertical mixed use. It could be middle housing, or excuse me, core housing. It could be any number of pieces, but it is looking at different types of housing units in addition to single family development. And so just kind of show you, this is the city versus the ACI, which includes the city as well as the area outside. Not big surprises. Compact multifamily and district multifamily are larger features than what you would see in corridor and base scenario. And then again, jobs. Jobs is a little bit more mixed. When we look at both the city and the ACI, the corridor alternative, we do assume that a lot of the land use would stay the same within commercial, and so you see kind of bigger or kind of more of a mix of that office and retail. Whereas in compact and district, you'd still see that large scale commercial, but it would be more dominated by mixed use, so more focused development types that allow for a variety of different kind of retail or office types at varying scales. And that's what we heard from the market analysis too, is that, we're even seeing this through COVID, is that the office and retail environment is changing dramatically. And so to be able to have that flexibility so that it's not just large format retail or traditional office space is going to be beneficial for kind of those future businesses looking for different types of spaces. And again, the ACI, about the similar results. We're just adding space. Again, most of the office and kind of employment that we're assuming is really within the city limits. Outside of the city limits is primarily residential. So you don't see as big a bumps within the jobs by sector between the city and the ACI. So the one piece that we've been kind of waiting for is, we've run these scenarios, and so what does it look like in terms of vehicle miles traveled or impacts to the transportation system? And this is kind of the first cut that Kittleson's been working on to show what the difference is in vehicle miles traveled or other metrics that they're going to be developing for the transportation analysis. How do these alternatives really compare? And so I think one of the interesting things that we found is that whether it's the 2040 base, compact corridor, or district, overall there aren't huge differences in BMT. The 2040 base actually has the highest BMT of all of them. I think the key consideration with this, though, is even though we're seeing BMT that's fairly similar across these four scenarios here, because they have the base scenario, the amount of population or housing or employment that can be accommodated within the scenarios is much greater than what you see in the base. And so what that starts to show is that there's really an efficiency between all of these scenarios by thinking about land use slightly different in its relation to transportation between home to work or home to school or home to services. The more compact type of development really does start to show that there is a greater efficiency for having the land uses actually more aligned with what the values have been for the community throughout this process. So just to show, when I talk about efficiency, like if you think about that 150 or so thousand daily miles traveled for a person, when we look at the differences between the scenarios, the compact has the least amount of vehicle miles traveled per person than what you would see for the district or the corridor. And the reason why is that you're looking at more of a scenario that focuses on housing and employment in central spaces, which means that you're driving essentially less to get to your job, or you're driving less to get to the grocery store. And so that compact component really does start to have an impact on the transportation system, even though you're accommodating more people or more housing. The next one, which is district, is very similar. And that's actually not surprising because compact and district share a lot of the same types of kind of components, where it is kind of mixed use and more mixing of housing and employment. And then the corridor is a little further down. we've tried to mix a little bit more uses, but I think the takeaway for this is that all three of these scenarios do actually improve upon what we're seeing for some of the base scenario that Kittleton's running. So when you look at people telling us throughout the process that congestion is an issue, when we start to see the number of efficiencies that we're seeing in these scenarios, this does have an impact on future land use and the decisions that we make. More qualitatively, more rooftops, more feet on the street, that does help with future transit route planning, because then the number of people has a direct impact on ridership. So if we do start to think more broadly about transit or bicycle infrastructure, having those folks available and around to use those systems, does has an impact on how we think about land use. So I'm going to stop there. Any questions on that? We'll get into the public input in just a second.
Alex, this is John. This is John here. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you.
Oh, so good presentation. Thank you. So with respect to compact district and corridor, the way it's presented to us, it sounds like, are we making a choice? Is there a decision point that we are going to pick one of these as, call it the template, to, base, the refinement and ultimate comp plan around?
Yes, I think the going back to my earlier comments, I think the important element for the work session is are there pieces of scenarios or scenarios that meet both the policy that we've been gathering from the public and the policy framework that you reviewed that should inform what a future land use map looks like. So the decision today is not to say, for example, we want the district's scenario to be our land use map. It's more like, are there specific elements we should consider so that when we come back to you, we have a draft land use map that you can make a decision on and revise. So these are really just inputs. They're not necessarily, pick one and that's what we're going to go do.
Got it. Thanks.
That's a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Louis, Alex. So kind of my observation is, as after looking at those maps, and I think John asked the critical question as to how to apply this rubric, toward the comprehensive plan. And it seems to me that there's really kind of north of I-90 and south of I-90. North of I-90, you could look at a compact and a corridor kind of approach, and maybe south of I-90, more of a district approach. Is that something that we could entertain, Alex, that you could use different approaches for different regions on the map?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the input we're looking for. Is there, I think in general, are there ways that direction that you would want to see a land use map go? And we're not asking you to make a decision on what a land use map is. It's more like you're saying, Louis, is, maybe we should look at something like mixed use or commercial north with residential. That would be good input to hear. So when we come back to you with a map, we can incorporate that information. Other questions? And we'll be bringing back more on the traffic side as well too. This was just the first tidbit of information that Kittleton was able to produce from the model runs from KMPO. But I think it is informative when we think about land use and informing transportation, kind of what the implications of that are in terms of how we make decisions moving forward. All right, so let me just step through this real quick. I think you may have seen this on previous presentations, but I just want to kind of bring this back. Over the summer, we did look at the 3 different growth concepts, and we asked or these should be actually called scenarios, with the community about preference in terms of types of development that people were interested in seeing. And the compact and the district scenarios were really the ones that by far came out the highest in terms of kind of interest level from the community and the types of land use that it might provide. And then when we start to look at development types, whether it's jobs, lost that there, whether it's jobs, it's really mixed use and employment that are important from a jobs component. but also housing. It's that urban neighborhood, mixed-use districts, and compact neighborhoods that start to come up really in some of those central points. Commissioner Rumpler, when you were talking about, should we look at a north I-90 versus south of I-90? When we look at these heat maps up on the top, there are definitely focus areas where the community was looking at providing different land use types or where they think growth should occur within the city. And so there does, appear to be that demarcation of the freeway within the city. And so when we started looking at this, and then we started looking at what the city is doing from core housing, when we look at the core housing map, and I certainly can't speak to this as an expert, I'm not involved with it, but we started to see that, these rings, these concentric rings that are being proposed within the core housing concept really start to align with a district or a compact development type. And so with each of these colors, these are different transects where different types of infill housing might be permitted. But it does start to align with that, those two scenarios in terms of what types of housing might be provided kind of within that central portion or even along some of the corridors within the city. Hillary or Sean, do you have anything else to add for this one?
I think just so the commission knows and staff and everybody watching, that, we really are trying to make sure that we're looking at core housing and how that relates to these growth scenarios and just making sure we're not missing anything. And so working with Alex and Mike Beharry, who's leading the core housing group, the committee work on that just to look at the place types and how does that fit and what does that mean for growth and traffic and all of those things. But I think what Alex said is correct, that it really looks like this aligns well with especially those two growth scenarios with district and compact. And as the colors on this map with the transects kind of going out from the city center, we will have different types of core housing product types that would be allowed. And so obviously we're working on that concurrently with the Envision Coeur d'Alene. So we'll be bringing forward more to you. And we have posted the virtual community meeting PowerPoint with the live polling results and the video of that meeting online. So I know most of you were there, but that's available. But it's great that we're working on this kind of concurrently because it's important to evaluate, how does core housing fit into this picture? What does that look like for growth of the community and especially in making sure it's compatible development in our neighborhoods?
I've got just perhaps a question. The underlying zoning for the city is not really being looked at to be changed. The zoning is still going to dictate what development can be developed in land. Everything we're seeing now, including the core housing, are suggestions, and I understand core housing is going to be a new type of ordinance. Again, all the pictures we see, all the buildings we see, and everything is more or less a suggestion that goes into our comp plan and Envision plan as, hey, this is the best way we can hopefully have developers look and say, this is what we see the vision of Coeur d'Alene being. But we're not changing any zoning, because if something in a zoning and they want to change, an R34 or C17, they have to go through the special use permit. And that process is still staying the way it is throughout the city. Am I correct in assuming that?
That's correct. And Alex has some slides coming up that he'll kind of show you how future land use map and zoning map, how they kind of correspond and how you would use the one to help make your decisions.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. Thanks, Alex.
No, that's great, Commissioner Messina. It's important to consider that, when we think about the comprehensive plan map, it's about the future, and it helps provides, direction for planning commission, for staff, for the community about, kind of the forward thinking of where growth should occur. And I think even with previous conversations through the hearing process, R34, for example, how does that, it helps provide some foundation for answering those questions for when that should be approved or not. All right, so let's step through here. I want to just show a couple examples, Commissioner Messina, getting to some of your questions with the draft comprehensive plan map. And just to remind, as we step through this, that the key piece of the comprehensive plan map is that it's tied directly to the vision and growth related policies that you've been reviewing. And so when you look at that structure, the comp plan map is not the end all be all. It's really the vision and the growth related policies that you use to help make decisions. But it does identify those general land use classifications within the ACI, which we've been calling place types, and it provides that guidance about future growth. And so how specific or general you want to be is there's communities do it a lot of different ways, but that overall guidance is really the key component for this. And so just as an example, Post Falls, your neighbor to the west, this is their comprehensive plan map. They call it a future land use map. And you'll see that there's really just a handful of colors on this map. And so when you look at that top legend, that's really those place types. High density residential, for example, business commercial. That's what those are place types essentially with what we're talking about in Coeur d'Alene. And so it's a lot of yellow, it's a lot of pink, and then when you start to get into the specifics of how the future land use map is implemented through zoning, I just focus in on the downtown area to show you that on the land use map, future land use map, it's zoned for business commercial, and then it has a city center district on top of it. So that's our future land use map. But when you look at zoning, it's much more nuanced. And so within that commercial or business and commercial designation, there are a number of zones that actually implement that future land use map. So that's when you get to Commissioner Messina, when you're asking about zoning changing, there's a number of zones that could apply to under any place type. And then another one, this is the city of Boise. And Boise within its comprehensive plan actually calls their land use designations place types, and then they identify those there. You'll see this map, even with, go back there for a second. Even for a city the scale of Boise, the map is pretty general in terms of kind of where things start to happen, but it gives a general outlay of where those future land uses are. And then if you start to dive in, I just pulled an area, if you're familiar with Boise, this is State Street, Collister intersection to be exact. They start to identify, like this map on the left, they have that big star in the middle. That's where they're looking at like an activity hub, or something that we've been talking about as a place to really kind of focus. But you'll see that with the colors are very, very general. This kind of pink area through the central portion is commercial, but when you look at the map on the right, it's again much more nuanced with the different zoning types. And you'll even be able to see, like between the yellow and the orange on the top of the map, those are different place types that have been applied, but the same type of zoning is actually allowed within two different place types. So it does, there is some flexibility in how these work together. But so I just want to show you these couple examples. Your future land use map is very general. Your zoning is often much more specific, but it does help provide that guidance when you need to make decisions about land uses moving forward. Any questions on that?
If you got a second, Alex, I'd just like to clarify something. When I sent out the email, I also included a portion of it was from Jerry Mason, and it was a court case from 1984, and as well as a video. And I wanted to, this is kind of a spot I think I can put in the TLDR, the too long didn't read version of that. And so basically what he was saying in the court case that he presented was someone came forward with a request for a zone change, and he didn't get that zone change. And so what he said was, well, your land use map shows that I should be this zone. And so he sued to get that zone. And what the court said was that you are not entitled to that based upon that land use map, that this is in the future and timing has everything to do with it. It may be too soon for you to have that zone at this time. And so the court basically struck that down. And so what I'm saying is you guys are not bound to your land use map to make decisions. If someone says, well, your land use map says you must do this, Planning Commission isn't required and City Council isn't required to meet that land use map at any given point in time. It is up to the timing of that development and if it makes sense at the time of that request. So that's it. Thank you.
And if I may add to that, thank you, Sean. That was a great overview of that court case. The other thing that Jerry Mason wanted to just provide his advice that he always provides to communities is the policies in the comprehensive plan are even more important than the future land use map. So you want to use them together to make your decisions. But as Sean said, yeah, the map might show that, but the policies might say, the timing is not right. So you always kind of have that backup. And the other thing is we won't make the map so specific that someone has to say, that's exactly my property, that's what it should be zoned, so. And it doesn't result in a zone change immediately either once a future land use map is passed. So it's just guidance for the future again.
Right. And that's what I was saying. It's more of a guide, because as commissioners, we always get hit with, well, your comp plan says this and that. So if we still make our decisions basically the same way, and the comp plan and the Envision 2020 is just going to be kind of a guide and help us through some of this stuff.
Right. The goal is to make it so your decisions are easier, give you a little bit more
Validation.
specificity, validation, all of that.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the simplest way to kind of, look at that, and Sean, thank you for sharing that, is the land use map is really a may as opposed to a shall. And that's kind of the legal distinction, is that you have you may apply that particular zone code in that land map, but you're not obligated, or you're not limited or restricted in terms of the language of shall, and it absolutely has to be a certain way. And that's what I got from that legal case.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And how we've seen land use maps applied, throughout the country. Some are more regulatory, some are more guidance. But this really helps you make decisions for kind of future actions. From a consistency standpoint, how do you want to move with that? As Hillary stated, the land use map is just one component. It's really the policy direction that's within the policy framework that is that other kind of key piece for this. This just helps make your lives a little bit easier in terms of making decisions.
Peter, you had
Yeah, I appreciate what Sean said. There's no way you can stop somebody from suing you. They can sue you for anything. The thing is, are they going to be successful? And it seemed to me that, and I don't know what that other jurisdiction did, but we, as a common practice, and we saw it a little bit earlier today, is if we have some questions and somebody's saying you can't do this, you got to do that, we turn to our city attorney, and he gives us advice and counsel. And that is an important part of our process, and I think that we shouldn't forget that. We thank you, Randy.
All right, so we have just a few more minutes. I wanted to bring back, the questions that I had raised earlier to start, having a discussion. Ultimately, we need to start developing a draft land use map for your review. Are there, items or kind of components that, based on what you've heard today and just kind of what you know from the project, that we need to be thinking about as we start to develop that map? I know Commissioner Rumpler was talking about, are there specific districts like north and south of I-90 that we might want to look at? So 3 questions to you. So coming back to, is there specific land use guidance you think is needed in a map to advance the policy framework, which again is kind of thinking about multiple modes, access to services, providing housing options? Is there a scenario or components of a scenario that starts to feel like it's been elevated? And I think to just kind of overlay what we're seeing with the core housing recommendations or proposals, how do we start to incorporate that? And is there some input that you could provide that would help us start to think about that land use map within the context of these 3 kind of broad questions?
Well, as far as, Alex, the land use guidance that's up there, I think all 3 of those are very important to be part of our plan, because that's what everybody's been talking about for, I don't know how long we've been doing this, for the longest time. So I believe all 3 of those are very important. How to core housing incorporate that, I think that's an important item to have further discussion on, because I think, and I've heard from some people that they think that we're just going to change the outlook of the city with this core housing thing, and that's really not the essence of it. It's, again, recommendations, and yeah, there might be some policies changes and things like that. So I think the core housing should be incorporated somehow as, again, guidelines for where we see the city going and how, and this is my interpretation, how development is implemented through the city. It comes down, as I've just mentioned, the zoning and what a particular developer wants to put in a particular piece of property. And as Peter has said, there's always public comment on if people are for or against, and that's the way our process works, as well as what we talked about today, an appeal process. So I think what I see on this slide is, yeah, it all should be incorporated somehow in our plan and in our vision for the future.
The question to me is, how should core housing be incorporated? Question is, what is core housing? Have we defined it?
Hillary, I'm going to let you take that
I
one.
know. Well, so we're working on right
Well,
now some
and I-
FAQs, some frequently asked questions to kind of help the community better understand that. But it's really the housing product types that are in between single-family detached and mid-rise apartments. So it's those triplexes, it's stacked flats, it's mixed, it's kind of live-work units, it's cottage court, things like that that could
For me
fit
to
in the
talk
neighborhood.
about whether it should be incorporated or not, is I'd like to know what it, I'd like to have my own mind what the definition is. Once the definition comes in, I can talk about it. The
Peter,
other
let me
item,
ask you,
yes.
Peter, have you gone online and seen, Mike, I don't know if you want to address any of this? You want to come
I
up
went
and?
I went to the last, attended the last meeting,
Uh-huh.
and it's, in my opinion, or view, it's still up in the air. It's still being worked through. You got some good ideas, you got a foundation of it. Now you're going through a process where you get public information, you're gonna have different groups, neighborhood groups, historic group, and so, and you're gonna go, then through all that process, you're gonna come up with a product. You're gonna come up with something, come up with a definition. What is core housing? Here's what it is. Then it goes through the process and it's approved or modified. Now we have something, and with that something, we can decide how we're gonna incorporate in our land use. And so that, to me, that's, we're working there, but we're not there yet.
Alex, yeah, do you want to jump in and kind of clarify what you meant by that question, maybe?
Yeah, and maybe reframe this just a little bit. Certainly, core housing is going to be through its own process. That it's already been moving through that. I think the question really from a core housing standpoint is that it will be providing a more opportunity for different types of infill housing. And in relation to the land use map or the scenarios that we were talking about, I think it really starts to identify similarities between some of the scenarios in terms of kind of overall land use, kind of look and feel, form with that. And so the reason why we put core housing in there is that this is another piece that you're working on that is very familiar, and that it also has a direct kind of relationship with the areas within the scenarios that we were looking for. So I don't know that we're making, the question isn't so much about whether or not what core housing is. I think that's for that process. For our standpoint, when we think about land use map, should we be thinking about more diverse housing types in the central portion of Coeur d'Alene, for example, or along the corridors or within districts? That's, I think, more the question that we need to get to for the comprehensive plan map. Because core housing has its own process.
Alex, John here. Just want to, you asked, how we feel about the three questions. And I'd just like to go on record and say that I agree with Chairman Messina that for the first question, those items listed there, the walking, the access to services, and the housing options, I think, those are probably the major elements. So for the first question, I think that's the answer. For the second question, as far as which scenario best articulates that, I believe it is the compact one because of the focus it has on infill and redevelopment of commercial areas. Those seem to be real hot button issues. And as we go forward into the future, I think infill and redevelopment of commercial areas is where we need our attention. And for the last question, I would say yes, core housing does need to be incorporated.
Thank you.
I tend to agree on the compact, only because I'm looking at the district and thinking it's maybe too specific. And with what we've visioned in the last year unfolding is that retail is a whole new game. It isn't a specific spot. It's a UPS truck, a FedEx truck, a delivery system, and how we get those products to people seems to be where it lands on their front doorstep. So people are using the internet and using their phone to get stuff. They don't walk through a shop anymore. It's kind of a disappearing mode. And I hope we keep the little shops, but I think we need broader, and I think Compact gives us a broader flexibility to be home, work, play. What is that old shopping mall that's just empty parking spaces now? Is it now multifamily? Is it high-rise? I think it gives us a little more flexibility. The district is a nice old-fashioned idea, but I think it is just that, it's old-fashioned. So I don't see it going forward as being something that's going to be as viable in this day and age. My kids' generation is all about the darn phone, and that's what they live for and die for. And so I'm thinking that would be a more flexible arrangement for our city.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Alex, I have just a couple of thoughts. So in terms of the land use guidance, I concur with both John, Lynn, and Tom, who have spoken about this. But I think that it all comes down to transportation science. Whatever we ultimately do in terms of deciding what the vision and guidance document, the comprehensive plan becomes, if we're not able to maintain transportation across the region, allowing people to access services, to be able to move around the area, and that transportation becomes essentially the choke point or the defining element of quality of place, which I think in many ways that is becoming the truth in most quality of place definitions or people's perception of quality of place, really has to do with how easy is it for me to move around and do the things I want to do to have my lifestyle. So I think although all those things are relevant, I think transportation is the most important driving element in the application of whatever transportation science you can apply. I think the scenarios that I think I've intimated my view of this is I think there's a kind of a north of I-90 and a south of I-90 vision of this. I think south of I-90 is already, and you may not want to call them districts, but they're certainly neighborhoods. I mean, you could interchange district and neighborhood in my mind, kind of south of I-90, and I concur about the compact scenario being applied kind of north of I-90. And I don't know enough about the core housing to be conversant, but I have a high regard for John. So if John thinks it's a good idea to apply it, I think it would be great to have it as part of the land use element.
Great, thank you. Other comments, concerns, suggestions?
Anything good else? Alex, commissioners? One thing, and maybe Hillary can touch on this, and maybe answer some of the questions, how we incorporate the core housing for what Peter brought up. The timeline from when we think we might have our core housing done, how it runs parallel to when you think we're going to have the comp plan done, so,
They're,
might work out.
excuse me, pretty close, kind of in tandem. So we had initially kind of thought we were going to be able to wrap up Envision and core housing around March. It looks like it's going to be a little bit delayed on Envision because we want to have more touch points and workshops with City Council as well, kind of to make sure we get it right. And then core housing, based on the community meeting we just had, we need to work with some of the neighborhood groups a little bit more to get them comfortable, and also work with our Historic Preservation Commission and consultant on what does that look like in some of the more historic neighborhoods that might have a historic district in place. So probably, I don't know, May, maybe June, realistically. I mean, if we can get it done sooner than that, that would be great. But yeah, we're trying to kind of do them concurrently.
I think it comes down to is how many meetings is city council comfortable with doing back to back? So if we if we can get them on board and get the meetings in front of them, we can move along pretty swiftly, but this time of year is difficult.
Right, yeah.
So let me just, I know we're a few minutes over, so let me just talk about next steps. So first of all, this input was great. Thank you for the conversation. So what we can start to do is start thinking about what a draft comprehensive plan map might look like based on the input today. And we can come back to you with that draft map for a conversation and another work session. And then we also are in the process of wrapping up, or Kittleson's in the process of wrapping up the draft traffic analysis. So we'll have some more information for you there as well too that will help kind of finalize those pieces. And then ultimately, like what we did with the policy framework, we would like to eventually have agreement on the place types and the comprehensive plan map and move that into the draft document so that after we're through that, then we can kind of wrap the kind of key plan components up, bring that back to you as a single package in the spring for review and discussion moving that forward. So this is a big step, but next time we see you, we'll have a draft map for discussion. So thank you for your time.
And I wanted to point out too, so we do have some city staff. You have obviously Mike Beharry is here as well, working on core housing. We have Chris Bosley, city engineer, and Ted Lancey, our building official, are also joining us online. We're going to be working with all of our city departments, water, wastewater, looking at all of the impacts on the utilities, transportation network, all of that, just to make sure we get it right, as well as fire and building code. So that'll be built in as well as we kind of move forward.
Oh, great. Thank you for sharing that. Didn't realize that's what was going on. Well, good. Sean, I'm going to give it back to you if Alex is done, and are we done wrapping up with the workshop?
Yeah, that does wrap it up. I'd like to thank everyone for your time. I hope everybody has a happy holidays and a Merry New Year if I don't see you between now and then.
Probably won't. I don't think I'll see you outside anywhere. Or I won't recognize you if you have a mask on.
Right, it's hard to tell who's who anymore.
Oh, and one more thing, I want to also thank Nicole Kaler and CDA 2030. They're helping us on the implementation plan portion of this and filling out, excuse me, the lead and supporting partners, which is a huge part of this too, is just trying to make sure that the action items right and figure out who might be the lead and supporting partner. So thank you to them for keeping that ball moving at the same time we're working on land use map and other aspects of this.
Right.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, Alex, anything else for us?
That's it. Hey, everybody have a great holiday.
Thank you, Alex.
We'll be back in early 2021, which is kind of, 2021 will be better than 2020, I'm hoping. So
No question.
we'll
Thank
touch
you,
base soon.
Alex,
But
for
have a
your
great
time.
and safe holiday for everybody. Thank you.
You too.
Thanks, bye.
Okay, with that, I want to say thank you again for staff, Hillary, Randy, Mike, everyone that works on everything that Sean rather, everyone that works on everything for the city behind the scenes that, again, I have to say, we don't see unless we're here. We come here once a month, maybe twice a month, have some workshop, but you guys are 24/7. So I appreciate all the hard work that you do just for this, and I can't even imagine what else you do, because I know you've got your plates full. But I want to thank you personally. Thank you.
Thank you, we appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, with that, I'm going to ask for an adjournment and wish everyone a happy holiday and safe Christmas and New Year's, and hopefully continue wearing your masks until 2021 changes our lifestyle back to something that's normal, which hopefully we hear we'll get there eventually. But again, so I'm looking for an adjournment.
Motion to
Guidance
adjourn.
of our chairman, I move for adjournment.
I have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.